Hey, Scandalized listeners, Charlie and Jackie here with a really exciting announcement.
We're doing our very first live recording of Scandalized at Podfort 2025. We'll be live at the Boise Contemporary Theater on Thursday, March 27th at 4 p.m.
Jackie and I are each going to bring you a fresh scandal and break things down from an expert lens, just like on the show.
We'd love to see our amazing listeners, so bring your friends and come talk scandals with us.
That's Thursday, March 27th at 4 p.m. from the Boise Contemporary Theater. See you then.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Jim Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters. The Ada County Coroner's Office is home to the only forensic pathologists in the state. 30 counties south of the Panhandle contract with Ada County to perform autopsies, but the county's been a pathologist short for about a year. That delays results, and Troy Oppie has more on why it's not an easy fix.
Autopsies aren't just for criminal investigations. Many times they can bring closure to a grieving family or are needed to close an estate or get a life insurance policy benefit.
The standards dictate that all cases have to be done within a certain period of time.
That's Ada County Coroner Rich Riffle. Standard is 90 days, he says, typically met by a staff of 3 pathologists in Ada County.
We've been down to 2 full-time for just about a year. And during that time, one of them took a paternity leave.
There are a couple complex autopsy cases that have been underway for about a year, he says. More than 36 total cases have taken longer than the 90-day completion standard. Riffle brought in retired pathologists from out of state to help, but that's, quote, hellaciously expensive.
We've got an invoice anywhere from $16,000 up to $55,000 per month because they charge per case. And then, of course, we had the airfare, lodging, and car. That's all included in that as well.
And it hasn't been enough to catch up. County commissioners this spring approved $100,000 in extra funds to cover the visiting contract pathologists. Riffle hopes to retain one as a part-time employee until this summer, when a new full-time pathologist has agreed to join the county. Long delays in closing cases can threaten accreditation, Riffle says, though he's not worried about that yet. Dr. Reed Quinton, Mayo Clinic forensic pathologist and president of the National Association of Medical Examiners, says difficulty hiring a forensic pathologist isn't unique to Idaho.
I think in 2024 we had 58 new graduates. However, that barely keeps a steady state in regard to the number of pathologists that are leaving the workforce at the same time.
That's nationwide data. He says recruiting medical students to become forensic pathologists has to happen early, in some cases even before medical school.
Most people coming out of pathology residency tend to gravitate towards some other field within anatomic pathology. So, for instance, surgical pathology, which is looking at tumors.
And there's clinical pathology, too, running laboratories.
It's very unusual to have someone who is practicing medicine in a different field who then switches back over to do forensic pathology.
The tight supply of forensic pathologists means coroners like Riffle have to get creative to recruit. Some, Riffle says, offer student loan payment incentives to come work. That's not on the table in Ada County, but Riffle says he can promise manageable caseloads and few of the more gruesome investigations pathologists might get in more populated areas.
They do see that. They say, okay, I can do this job that I really love, but it's not gonna, kick my ass while I do it.
The new full-time pathologist can't start until this summer, after they complete their training. In the meantime, Riffle says hiring a part-time fill-in instead of contract temps would help limit costs, but he's not optimistic he'll find someone for that part-time role. Once the county returns to a full roster of pathologists, Riffle expects to be caught up and back to closing cases in 90 days by this fall.
That's our reporter, Troy Oppie, and he's joining us right now in studio. Okay, you say criminal cases usually get bumped to the front of the line for autopsies. Tell us more about why non-criminal cases need autopsies. You talked about things like life insurance. Now, is this because you can't get the life insurance until you can show you didn't murder your loved one?
Well, yeah, that's one of the factors. A beneficiary of a life insurance policy will not get that payout if they are convicted of killing that person, certainly. But so to back up just a bit, accidental deaths are almost always investigated in some way, and a death certificate can be issued with an indeterminate cause of death, but a life insurance policy might pay out until a determination is made. There might be other issues closing an estate without that determination as well. Sometimes a death which might appear accidental could become suspicious based on the result of an autopsy. And beyond all those factors, families whose loved ones die unexpectedly or accidentally might simply be waiting on an autopsy for some closure. So, all these are reasons why that non-criminal investigations are going to require or going to need an autopsy. And with the life insurance, there are other factors as well. Typically, a life insurance policy isn't going to pay out if someone has taken their own life within 2 years of purchasing a policy. And there are other considerations too. Life insurance companies want to know that somebody didn't lie on their initial application and not state that they had an illness or affliction of some kind, that if that then led to their death, the life insurance company is not going to want to pay out on that policy. So there's a bunch of different reasons why these can be important.
Well, but this is, waiting up to a year, which you have talked about, to get a final result. That's got to be hard for families, not just for the life insurance, but as you said, for closure. I mean, these are families who are grieving the loss of somebody who died.
Yeah, and the year-ish cases that are outstanding are very complex cases. And what Coroner Riffle told me is, and he went out of his way to compliment his pathology staff. He says they've been working very hard. They can only work on so many cases either way because of accreditation standards and your basic workload. But it's kind of this, with these complex cases, it's the low-hanging fruit. I can work on one thing for X number of hours today, and I can either get this case across the finish line or I can make incremental progress on this more complex case. And so that's why some of these more complex autopsies are taking so long, the coroner told me. One kind of disappointment that I had in reporting this story is I tried to find a family that was waiting, and I think unsurprisingly, did not get a lot of interest in talking on the record about that. And so we weren't able to talk to a family that is going through this. But Coroner Riffle told me, he says, we're acutely aware of the impact that delays have on these families. 90 days is kind of the standard. Not everything is in the coroner's office control. They send toxicology reports or exams out for third parties to complete. So not everything is in their control, but a 90-day standard is a fair expectation, and they're beyond that on a lot of cases still.
Okay, I want to veer off just for a second on what you said. You mentioned not being able to do too much because of accreditation. I think there's this idea that, well, whoever is there, the couple of people who are working there, just work them double, give them overtime. But it sounds like you can't do that for the accreditation standards. Correct.
And Ada County is actually one of only a few coroner's offices that are accredited by multiple agencies. But those accreditation standards, they cover a lot of different things, right? And caseload is just one of them. But, accreditors know, and coroners know too, the more work you are putting on your pathologists in this intensely technical role, sometimes very emotional role, depending on the case that you're working. If you are working somebody a lot, the chances that person might make a mistake are going to increase. Sure. And so that is why there are limits, based on these accrediting standards, that pathologists can work a number of cases.
Good limits, but interesting. Okay, so how many autopsies is the office in Ada County doing each year?
So the county did nearly 500 full autopsies in 2024. That's about a 25% increase compared to 2020. Not necessarily surprising given the population increase here in the county in that time. And certainly going through a pandemic in those years has likely added some to that total as well. That works out to more than 150 per pathologist last year. Plus, there are several hundred other autopsies, which are limited, external only, or remote exams that happened last year. Riffle told me that workload is right for 3 full-time pathologists, and even with some cases coming to Ada County from other counties across the state, they would still need 3 pathologists just to handle the caseload that is needed here in Ada County.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about retired pathologists that you had talking about in the story to come to help out. And when you were talking about that in the piece, I was reminded of nurses who would travel around during the COVID pandemic and take the best paying jobs for a while and then go home and then go back out, when they felt like it, when it was time, whatever. Is this the same kind of thing? Are we talking about?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very, very similar to where you have a retired pathologist that they work with a third party to kind of connect where the need is and where the opportunity is for these folks that aren't working full-time anymore. And they come to a place on a contract basis. Very expensive, as the coroner explained in that story, and also includes, lodging and travel and those types of things. So very similar, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk money. You talked about some money that's allocated. Has it been spent? Do we need more? Where are we with that?
So the county commission gave the coroner's office $100,000 extra, and that's essentially to pay for these contract pathologists, which Riffle says due to budget rules, they actually can't use the unused personnel money from the vacant pathology position. They can't use that to hire these contract pathologists because it's based on a full-time position. So he's having to play, it's a bit of a puzzle for him, and he hopes that he'd be able to find that part-time employee, which if you come onto the county part-time, you would fall under an employee, and he'd be able to use those personnel funds to pay for that. They'd still have to use some of the extra funds to pay for lodging and travel, et cetera, but they could kind of balance it that way. But considering you're using the same pool of retired pathologists to try to entice them to come on part-time when they're on a contract, he's not having much success there. So it's probably going to continue to be contract until they reach their full 3-person team later this summer.
Well, and you mentioned there's a real shortage of new pathologists coming in the pipeline. I mean, why is that? I mean, we watch shows like CSI, even Quincy. Sorry, I'm dating myself. My mom used to watch Quincy all the time. They made that kind of job, cool.
NCIS, right?
Right?
With Polly Perrette, I think. Yeah.
So people aren't, jumping up to become the next Quincy?
Dr. Quinton, in the story, he leads the National Association of Pathologists. He put it to me this way. Most people who want to go in the medical field do so because they want to help people, which is to say help them live longer and live healthier lives, right? Mm-hmm. Forensic pathology, for all its importance, not that. Right? And so it's really hard. It's really uncommon, Dr. Quinton told me, to get someone into the forensic pathology track late in medical school or once residency has started. So in many cases, they really do have to start recruiting students prior to medical school. And as you heard in the story, there were fewer than 6 graduates from these programs last year. Typically, that also involves fellowships, other specialized training. And so, like I said, Ada County has been able to hire a third full-time pathologist, but that person can't start until the summer because they're still going through the completion of this training. And so that's another hurdle in hiring is the literal scheduling of when they're going to be done and available to take a job.
So how is Ada County competing when it's hiring a pathologist? And I should point out, you mentioned growth. Mm-hmm. We're going to keep growing. We're probably going to need another one at some point. How does Ada County, with not probably as much funds as some of the bigger areas that also need pathologists, how are they going to compete?
Coroner Riffle is leaning heavily into the livability factor here, right? We all live here. We know this is a great place to be. There's a lot of great things to do. When you are a government agency, there isn't a lot of wiggle room that you might have for salary or other financial perks. Some of these governments, as mentioned in the story, are starting to look at ways to pay off student loans as an incentive, but that's happening in a couple places. It's not happening overall. The coroner says, one thing he can offer is a brand new facility. They just opened that building last year. They're going to add a new CT scanner, he said, this year, and that's going to make Ada County's coroner facility among the most technologically advanced in the Northwest. So that's a perk that he's trying to lean on as well. But the biggest thing the coroner told me was workload. If you can keep that workload manageable, keep your pathologists happy, they feel like they're not overworked, they're not going to be looking to jump in a competitive marketplace. So that caseload is the number one factor.
Wow. We've been speaking with All Things Considered host Troy Oppie about a shortage of forensic pathologists in Idaho. We'll put a link to his story on our website. Troy, thank you.
My pleasure.
And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.